Welcome back to In the Arena. Earlier this month, the Diocese of Brooklyn announced a bold and controversial proposal to partner with the City of New York and convert some Catholic schools into charter schools. To add more insight into this, we are joined now by Ed Wilkinson, the editor of the diocesan newspaper, The Tablet. First, though, let's turn to Father Harrington, because you have been involved in this whole process. What's the very latest? Give us an update on where things stand.
Right now, we are continuing to work with the mayor's office. We are working with our legislative elected officials to kind of still get the sense of what is the legislative support for this sort of initiative, an initiative that would allow the conversion of some Catholic schools to become charter schools. At the same time, we're working through the process of making applications for some schools to be converted to Catholic schools. Key thing here is to realize is that what we've been looking at is basically trying to figure out what are the areas in our diocese, when we make these considerations, what are the areas in our diocese where there are a lot of children, where there are not a lot of schools, where they're not going to be in competition with Catholic schools, and then where could we go forward? So that's the process that we've been sort of pursuing at the moment.
There's so many different elements involved: the parents, the students, the teachers, the parish priests.
Right.
The hierarchy, the City of New York, there are just so many different dimensions to it. I know it's hoped that this could be done by next fall. Is that really feasible?
I think that the mayor's office, we in the diocese, some of the outside groups that we've been working with are all working very hard to ensure that we could get through this process so that Catholic schools, which were once Catholic schools, would be able to be opened as charter schools. So we are working very hard. At the same time, it's important to realize that as we go through this process, we recognize that we're always self-checking, making sure that we don't want to just run headlong into this, make a decision, and have to dial it back after the decision has been made. So while we're trying to get all the ducks in a row, make sure that all the process has moved forward. After we have made, as we're doing that, same thing, we're trying to make sure that this is going to be the right fit for us in the Diocese of Brooklyn.
The logistics of this. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that charter schools that are really public schools cannot be run by religious organizations.
Right.
So how do you work through that?
Right. That's a big question, right? So the state law in New York State is that a religious corporation cannot run a charter school. But in this case, what we would be doing is that in a local area, we would be helping to select a board that would actually be responsible for the applying for a charter and then running the charter school.
So a board of citizens?
Well, it can be, listen, I mean, a priest, a pastor of a parish, he's a person like anybody else. He can sit on a board of a corporation. There are people, prominent people in the community can sit on a corporation. That's what we're looking to do, is form corporate boards that would then be responsible for these schools.
Both you, Ed and Elizabeth, have had a lot of conversations with people about this. This is a real hot button. Ed, what's your take on it?
Well, some people are very concerned. I talk to parents especially. They're very concerned about some of the curriculum that might be coming in to the charter schools. They're particularly concerned about the health or the sex education programs that the state would require be taught in these schools. You know, for years we've been mobilizing our Catholic people against the sex education programs in the public schools. Now it seems like we're willing to pay for the buildings that are going to house these lessons. So how are we going to get around that, Father Harrington?
I think the key thing here, Ed, is that, the Catholic Church, we're not into teaching a sex ed curriculum, but we are into teaching about love. And love does involve sex. And I think that what's important for us to really important, and I think that's really key, right? Because I think that one of the things that everyone would agree on is something that is really lacking in the lives of our young people is love, right? How do they love and be loved, right? It's a very big question, right? So the fact is that as a church we have a responsibility to teach love, right? And it's recognized as a component of teaching about love is teaching about sex, human interaction and attraction. At the same time, the state curriculum does not require that we teach anything that would offend our integrity, our moral integrity in terms of this teaching. The question becomes is in the lower grades, that's certainly the case. If you get into high school that's a different case. Another key component here is to recognize what's the nature of a charter school, right? The charter school is operating under is chartered to operate under the curriculum of the state of New York. And in our reading of the curriculum of the state of New York, we're not going to really run into any difficulties. We're not going to run afoul of the sex ed curriculum.
But could a Catholic school building really be used for lessons, say, that teach something that is really against church teaching?
Well, give me an example. I mean,
artificial contraception.
Absolutely not. Not going to happen.
Isn't that part of the curriculum? No,
It
you
isn't.
hear all these horror stories
But
about what's
that's-
taught in
that's-
these sex education
listen,
programs.
you got to separate fact from fiction. The fact is that that is not a part of the curriculum for grammar school from K through 8. We're not going to have that problem. And
So
as a
there's no
result,
discussion about condoms or anything like that?
we do not have to have discussions about contraception. Now, do you have to speak about AIDS? Yes, you do. But I mean, we should be speaking about that anyway,
should be,
because
sure.
that's something our children are faced with. So the question is not a matter of, do you have to address certain issues? Yes, you do have to address certain issues. The question for us is, how do we address certain issues? And by the way, our schools should be doing that anyway. So that's really the question for, this is an opportunity for us. Certainly, we're put into a difficult circumstance, right? We don't want to convert our schools into charter schools. We would prefer that our schools stay Catholic schools. But when you have a declining enrollment, which is rather steep, in a very quick period of time, the question becomes, for us, is that do we want to stay educating young people? And once we start to ask that question, you realize that you can't do it always in the way you best want to do it. We would prefer to have our classrooms with crosses on the walls, right? We don't want to take down crosses from the walls. But the fact is that we have crosses on the walls in certain buildings which are now empty. In my own parish, St. Joseph, the school was converted into an SRO. So the question is how is that contributing to the mission of the church in a way that converting these charter schools would not be? That's really the
I'd
question.
like to get you drawn into this conversation. So what's your reaction to all this?
I'll speak as a parent who has had the experience of having a child in Catholic school and also in public school. Dealing with human sexuality is something that the church would have to do anyway if the church is going to be honest and holistic. So that's not even so much my concern. My concern is you're taking away the day-to-day formation in the Catholic faith for hundreds of students. What is the church's plan? How are they going to make up for that loss? You were talking about teaching love. It's the church's job to teach love. Well, absolutely it is. But our CCD programs are for the most part deplorable, and they've been deplorable for 40 years. And we know they've been deplorable and they haven't been working because our children leave after confirmation and they don't come back, except in very rare dioceses where maybe they have a particularly good interactive program or a particularly good youth leader. If you're going to now say, right now hundreds, possibly in the future thousands of Catholic students are not going to have the day-to-day formation that Catholic schools are famous for, what is the diocese going to do? How are they going to address that and make up for that loss? I know that when my son was in Catholic school, he had 4 years there, and his formation as a young 8 and 10-year-old Catholic was phenomenal. My other son came up through the public school, didn't have it. He's in a Catholic university now, and he's saying, why didn't I learn all of these things? Are we going to be preaching more about the faith from the pulpit?
But let's be clear. The primary formators of the religious faith of children is in their home, right? The
Absolutely.
primary place where a child is formated in the life of faith is in the home. And so I think the question from our perspective is you had mentioned the deplorable state of CCD. I'm a product of CCD, and thankfully I'm a priest, right? So it did something right for a few people. But the question is it really had to do with my family's faith life. In Catholic school at one time, maybe the faith life was vibrant, and that was part of the success of Catholic schools as well. What has happened now has really been an erosion of the lived faith experience, not simply in CCD, but also in our schools.
That comes down to, again, to what is the church going to do about it. You can't simply say, well, all of this comes and falls on falls at the feet of the parents who perhaps aren't raising Catholic families as they should be. But the church has done such a poor job of really supporting and instructing the Catholic family that I don't think you can simply say it belongs in the family, in the household. I think that you have 35%, I believe the poll now is 35% of Catholics don't even know what, or only 35% of Catholics understand what transubstantiation is, what the Holy Eucharist is. My husband's an extraordinary minister, and he talks about people coming in saying, can I have an extra cookie for my kid? The kid will cry if I don't have an extra one for him.
Elizabeth?
So I'm rambling. I'm sorry.
No, I'd like you to finish that thought, but we do have to go.
Sorry.
So I understand. I understand exactly what you're saying. Last words, Ed? It's obviously a discussion that's going to continue.
I think we have a public relations problem here, and we're going to have to sell this idea of charter schools. Well, it's a big test. It's a big test because I think there's a lot of opposition or a lot of confusion, and that we're going to have to really mount a good public relations campaign to sell it.
You know what, Ed? We are going to help through the course of this program at least deal with the confusion and get the issues on the table. Thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. Out of the ashes, some thoughts as we begin the season of Lent. We'll be right back. And finally, we wanted to take a few minutes this week to talk about the 40-day season that began on Wednesday, Lent. So Father Cush rejoins us again. Let's start with you. Did you make any particular choices of sacrifices for Lent?
Well, for me, in my own particular ministry as a high school seminary teacher, for me, one of the big things, I'm going to try to be much more patient. Patient with my students, patient with myself, with my colleagues. Not to say they don't have to hand things in on time, let's just say, but to be a little more patient, a little more understanding, and to take that's a primary thing in my life, because I like to get everything in very quickly and very efficiently. So to realize that not everyone operates at the same speed sometimes, and to be more patient, and that's a gift, sacrifice that gift of time, maybe.
Elizabeth?
I'm going to try to go to Mass every single day, which is a very big deal for me because generally once I get going and distracted with my own things, to stop and say, oh, look what time it is, let me run to Mass, it's very easy to slough off. So I'm going to try to do that, and then I'm going to try to actually pay attention, not criticize anything that I see going on at church, because I have this awful habit of saying, look at that woman over there, why is she wearing that? I'm not going to.
And you also kind of get irritated with the homilies at times, not necessarily in your own parish, but...
No, we have some really excellent homilists at our parish, but I do, yes, part of my Lenten pledge is when I hear a priest say, we are special, God is special, Mass is special, I won't sit there going, wish I brought my knitting.
Father Harrington?
When my alarm goes off at 6 o'clock in the morning, I want to get right out of bed, because I think that for me, I need a little more time for prayer. And the day gets so crazy, and everyone's got phones and Blackberries and pagers, and it just doesn't seem like there's enough silence and sort of quiet in my life. And the early hour is the time you can do it. So that's what I'm trying to do, and it's been tough so far, even though we're only on day one.
We were it is only
What about you, Jane?
I've given up sweets, and I'm going to try to be a little less...
That's because you're so sweet already. You don't need any sweets.
I'm going to try to be a little more cautious in my judgments of people, which I think is sometimes very difficult.
That's very wise. That's sort of asking for an understanding heart, like King Solomon.
Well, we'll see. Again, it's early. We've got 40 days. But, we talked earlier about homes and faith, and that's where it all began. But so this practice of sacrifices during Lent and really observing the Lenten season, how is it more difficult in today's world than it's ever been?
You know what I think it is I think that the question is there the support for a lot of these pious practices today that there was in the past. I noticed when I was out in the city yesterday how many people had ashes on their forehead. I remember as a kid, there were loads and loads of people. And today, there are a diminished number of people who are wearing ashes. At the same time, I think that when I was celebrating Mass in my very small parish, like 300 people show up for Mass. So to me, I think that, is there a diminution of the religious practices? Yes. But I think it's not. I think that the outward practices are changing. I think that the desire for something spiritual, deeper, is really just as strong, if not stronger.
Father Cush, I'm curious about your thoughts on this observation of Lent.
I would think right now, and I have the same experience as Father. I was in the, obviously my ministry is in the Cathedral Prep Seminary, the high school seminary, so I was with the high school level seminarians yesterday. But the idea that for many of these guys, there's no consciousness from these young men coming in, even though they're open and willing to know and to discern their vocation to priesthood.
And these are guys thinking about being priests.
We have to work, we're talking about before, pre-catechize. So really freshman year religion, which I had taught for a couple of years now, a new rector does, it's catechizing those that one day will do the catechesis. And that's really important for us. We're dealing in a culture. I noticed the same thing. I went to Forest Hills yesterday afternoon, and very few of us are walking around with ashes on our forehead. You know, it's a very interesting part of society now. Do we see these pious practices, as Father said, supported and encouraged? Really, but it's the identity of Catholics to bring that forward.
And we're going to let that be our last word. Thank you so much, Father Cush, for being with us. I hope that you are patient, and I hope you accomplish your goal of going to Mass every day. Thank you, Elizabeth Scalia, for being with us.
Thank you.
Father Harrington, we're going to get you another alarm. Thank you very much. And I'd like to remind you that you can watch us online at netny.net/inthearena. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Jane Hanson. I'll see you next time in the Arena.